Hello, and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon-neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation. We're going to talk plastic recycling today because the evolution of plastic recycling is essential to cleaning up a plastic-addicted world. Back in June of 2021, we talked with Jeff Gold, founder and CEO of Nexus Circular, which was called Nexus Fuels at the time. And the company had been operating a test facility for a couple of years. Nexus Circular has developed an advanced chemical recycling technology that can make plastics purportedly as recyclable as metals, in which only a few % worth of the material is lost each time it's processed. By contrast, traditional mechanical recycling technologies are effective only 1 or 2 times before the plastic molecules are degraded and become useless. Today, we welcome Jodie Morgan. She's the new CEO of Nexus Circular, and she's here to discuss their progress and a flurry of news that has placed Nexus at the forefront of the next generation of plastics recycling. They raised $150 million in January to build additional capacity and launched a 10-year agreement to provide recycled plastic to Braskem America. In February, Nexus announced a long-term partnership with Chevron Phillips Chemical to make a circular form of polyethylene, the plastic used in food wrap, shopping bags, and detergent bottles. With all these changes, it's time to check in on Nexus Circular. And given the progress I just described, I sense that an IPO could be in the offing, and that might represent the first next-generation sustainability company to go public and potentially ignite a stock market rally in green investing. We'll have to find out, but you can learn more about Nexus Circular at nexuscircular.com. All one word, no space, no dash, nexuscircular.com. Welcome to the show, Jodie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. You know, you were appointed CEO at Nexus last May, and a new senior team was installed. And this obviously marks the beginning of your aggressive commercialization of the technology. Tell us about your background and what the new team is tasked with achieving.
Absolutely. So I'll start with me, although the more important part is the team and what we're doing going forward. So I've been in manufacturing for about 35 years. I've had a chance to run 6 different organizations. And the last 15 years, all of it's been in manufacturing. But the last 15 years have been in ESG-focused companies. And once I found out that you could do well and do good, I sort of never turned back. And for me, manufacturing is this amazing part of our economy where you get to provide good jobs to people, and they hopefully take that income back into their community. So it has this great ripple effect. But if you can add to that this do-good aspect to it, then you tend to attract people that are young and entrepreneurial and forward-looking and want to do more than just whatever your company is focused on. In Nexus's case, obviously, post-use plastic. So I came to Nexus about 1.5 years ago. I had already been in the space of advanced recycling, using post-use plastic to convert back into a usable product. Mm-hmm. But Nexus's technology really, to me, was groundbreaking and exciting, and the company was poised for growth, and that's what I like to do. So that's my background, and that's why I'm here.
Well, you know, one of the things that impressed me in the conversation with Jeff a couple of years ago was that you guys just stayed head down on trying to prove this technology, which is critical because of all the concern around plastic recycling. Now, between about $80 billion and $120 billion worth of plastics are made and discarded every year. How big do you think the market opportunity is for Nexus Circular based on what we know about plastic waste?
Yeah, the market is huge. And you touched on another point that I think is important. So maybe if I go to that first, and then I can talk about the size of the market. So one of the things that I was really impressed about when I first visited Nexus was the fact that the founders had made the decision to keep their heads down and really work on perfecting the technology before they went out to the market to talk about what was being done here. But the other thing that they did is they said, if we really want this company to grow and make a serious dent in the post-use plastic issues, then we need to actually develop a business model that can be a for-profit business model,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore it has to be economically viable. And although pyrolysis, the base technology that we use, has been around for decades, we need to make sure that it's not just about that technology, about that conversion. The front end had to also, so what is the right type of feedstock?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that the process is economically viable all the way through the process? How do we help our customers to be able to use the product we make directly in their assets so they don't have to make an investment to be able to use us? And all of that took time. And Jeff and Eric, who was the other co-founder, made the decision that they were going to keep their heads down until they had that right. And then once they had that right, and the business actually had been commercially producing for a number of years before they said, okay, check that box, then it was time to pick the head up and grow. When we think about the size of the market, there's been enough plastic produced and there's enough plastic in landfills that we never have to bring any more naphtha-based product from fossil fuels to continue to supply the plastic markets. When I look at it, that's how big the opportunity is. If you look at it from more of a sheer numbers standpoint, there's 450 million tons of plastic produced each year. The majority of that plastic is plastic that can be post-use plastic for us as a feedstock for us, about 60% of that. So the market potential is huge for companies like Nexus.
You mentioned the idea that the plastic that's even in the landfill can be recaptured and processed, which was one of the most intriguing elements of this when we first talked with Jeff. Now, the other thing that has changed since we spoke with Jeff is that the company changed its name from Nexus Fuels to Nexus Circular. He talked a little about thinking about that on that last conversation, but how did that change the customers and partners that you choose to work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you look at pyrolysis, what we do, so if you think about plastic, I always think about, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I like the visual. So if we think about plastics, it starts out when someone's making plastic, think about a Lego brick, so an individual Lego. And when you make plastic, you build those bricks up into a Lego tower. So now you have this long tower. That's plastic. And all we do is we collect these Lego towers and then we put them into a reactor, apply heat, no oxygen, no burning, and we break them back down into the Lego bricks. That's it. Very, very simple. We sell those bricks to people like Shell and Chevron Phillips, and they build it back up into a Lego tower, back into plastic. That's it. When Jeff first started, there was a question as to how much he could break down those towers. And what he started with was he made something that was equivalent to like a bunker fuel. So it was a fuel source. But as he worked on the technology more and more and said, I really want it to be circular, he figured out how to refine the process. And now the product that we make is an equivalent to naphtha. That's what companies like Shell and Chevron Phillips use as a feedstock to make plastic. So he said
that's what they get from oil.
That's what they get from oil. So instead of it being a fuel and only having one more life, if he processed it a little bit more and broke those towers down a little bit more, made shorter towers, then it could be naphtha. And if it could be a naphtha equivalent, then when our customers use it, they make it right back into plastic and it can keep going and going and going. So as soon as he figured that out, we said, okay, it's no longer Nexus Fuels, it's Nexus Circular, because that's what we're doing today.
Let's talk about that process a little more. Right now, you process the resins, plastic resins, number 2, number 4, number 5, and number 6. Number 6 being particularly troublesome for a lot of people, which it's great to see polystyrene, the foam, being recycled. Have any of these plastic resins emerged as especially compatible with your process and proven more valuable to the point about being economically profitable?
So any of those streams work great in our process. We made the decision that we were going to focus on films. And the reason that we focus on films is because they're the most abundant.
Yep.
And if you look at the traditional mechanical recycling, the equipment was not set up to be able to handle films. And as a result, most films ends up in landfills. So it's abundant. It's a bigger problem than some of the other things like rigids. And therefore, it is more cost effective to bring in as a feedstock. But it also goes along with our mission that we're really addressing a major part of the plastic issue.
And as a practical question, can the different types of plastics be mixed throughout the process, or do they need to be processed separately? Which also goes to, we'll talk a little more about sorting later.
They do not have to be separated. They can all be processed. They can all be processed together. We'll put in a mix of, so we can use the films, we can use the rigids, we can also put in foam. So the polystyrene, sometimes it's in a foam form, sometimes it's not, but we can put it in that form. Polypropylene can also come in a foam form, and we can process that directly as, right from foam. We don't do any pre-processing, which is also something that was different for Nexus. We bring it in directly from wherever that source is and put it in. So you'll see large sheets of foam going into our process. You'll see barrels going into our process. It goes straight in without any pre-processing, and it can be mixed.
That's important to making it profitable, because the challenge of separating everything is one of the biggest issues in terms of cost. So that's really interesting to hear now. Now, in 2021, Nexus had diverted about 350,000 pounds of material from landfills, and now you're up to about 8 million. How has the production capacity changed in the past couple of years?
So in 2022, so last year, as I mentioned, we had been commercial producing the product and selling the product since 2018. But in 2022, we made the decision that we really needed to start running more like a true manufacturing process. So we went to a standard 24/5 process, so 5 days a week, but 24 hours a day. And then later on in the year, we went to a 24/7. So most manufacturing processes like to run. It's the turning on and turning off that actually causes you issues with your process. If it runs, it's normally happy. So we went to a 24/7. We did that. And as a result, last year, we had a pretty steep increase in the amount of product that we were processing through our plant. So of the 8 million pounds that we had done by the end of last year, 4 million pounds of those were done in 2022. So half of the product that we produced over that time period was done last year. By the end of this year, we'll be running at a rate of about 30 million pounds per year of post-use plastic going through the plant. And then we have a new plant coming on in the middle of next year. And by the end of next year, we'll be over 200 million pounds of plastic per year being processed.
200 million pounds of progress. That's really encouraging to hear. Now, let me ask about a few of the recent initiatives or news announcements, because you've had so much to talk about lately. You just raised $150 million from Cox Enterprises, which is an Atlanta-based, as you are, media company generally. What drove their investment in, and how does your clean tech fit into their strategy?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I joke sometimes that Cox is, one of the largest companies that no one's ever heard of. And if you're from Atlanta, you've heard of them, but you don't have to go very far away from Atlanta to have not heard of Cox. So Cox, as you mentioned, communication company. They also have a fairly significant automotive arm. What people know less about is actually their initiative in circularity. So they have a third leg on their stool, and it started as a ventures group, and now it's called Cox Clean Tech. They've invested over $1 billion so far in clean tech companies. So Cox made a decision years ago that they were going to positively impact 34 million people by 2034. And they are doing that through a lot of community work and a lot of grants and other investment in the community, but they're also doing it by investing directly in companies like Nexus that are making a serious change in the world. So it is an important part of their growth strategy, but it is also an important part of their mission.
It's so fascinating how that company has expanded into this area. I first talked with them at an ISRI conference, a scrap recycling conference in 2018, and it was surprising then. But to see how much they have how many steps they've taken, and so deliberatively, is impressive. Now, you're also working with Chevron Phillips Chemical, and they want to produce 1 billion pounds of recycled polyethylene. How much do you need to increase your capacity to keep up with their demand?
Yeah. So if we look at our offtake partners today, we have agreements, that have been announced publicly with Shell, Chevron Phillips, LyondellBasell, and Braskem, and they each have actually fairly similar pledges. They say them in slightly different ways with slightly different target dates, but they're all around a billion pounds of product. When we look at our facilities and trying to help them to meet those goals, we could actually build 30 plants and be able to provide them with the majority of what they need to meet those goals. And we work very closely with them to help to understand which part of that goal are you looking for Nexus to be able to fulfill for you.
So as you think about the placement of those 30 facilities, do we need to think in terms of regional collection and processing in order to shorten some of the life cycle of the recycling process and keep materials in at least regional, within regional use, I guess is the way to put it? Thinking about the circular economy and something that we don't have today, is this stuff going to be going round and around locally, or is it still going to be shipped halfway around the world to be processed is really the question.
I think there's a lot of, look, when you think about post-use plastic, this is a team sport, right? Everybody's got a role to play. Our model is, similar in so many ways to other people that are working in the space and different in other ways. We do believe that it's important to stay close to the feedstock.
Okay.
Once we've processed the feedstock and turned it back into a circular liquid, now it's a liquid. It can be shipped in rail. It can be shipped in pipeline. So the second part of its journey, you can be a little bit further away from where it's going to be used and back into plastic. But on the front end, we think it's important to be close to the source of the feedstock. And so when we do our feasibility studies of where we want to locate our plants, we look at usually largely populated areas because that's where a lot of the plastic waste is generated. And we go between 150 to 250 miles from that site. And we do a study where we literally go out and contact hundreds of potential sources of feedstock. And then we only agree to locate a plant in that location if we need no more than 3% of what we determine is available in those areas. So typically you're going to look at cities, larger cities, or even sprawling cities. So you can go down to Louisiana if you're close to Houston, as an example. And that's how we look to locate our plants. But there's a lot of plastic, and there's a lot of cities that qualify for that.
Well, and that's the important point, is there's a lot of plastic and a lot of it just hasn't been recycled. Tell us about some of the partners that you're sourcing the material from. Obviously municipal programs, but how else are you going to try to get to all that plastic that's not being captured at this point?
Yeah, if you look at the post-use plastic generation today, it's about 60% is coming from consumers and about 40% is coming from industrial. Mm-hmm. So if you think about packaging, which is one of the places that a lot of the film will come from. So you have the person that's making the plastic. They actually have a waste stream within their plant. Some of that they can reuse and some of it they can't. So if they can't, we can use that. Mm-hmm. Then they sell that plastic to the person who's going to make it into the packaging. They're going to make it into the film. And so one of our investors, PrintPack, would buy that resin and they will make it into the film. When they're making it into the film, they also have a waste stream. and they cannot reuse that waste stream within their process, typically. That's another source for us. And then you go to the manufacturer, the person who's making the chips. And when they're putting it in the package, they have a waste stream from that package. That's a source of supply for us. And then when you buy those chips and you dispose of your bag, that's when it then goes into what we think of most of the time as consumers as the waste stream. But if you look at the first three, so the resin manufacturer and the person who's making the packaging and the person who's putting the chip in the bag, that's 40% of the waste plastic is generated in that part of the supply chain. So we try to work with each of the companies along that supply chain to help them get to their zero waste goals.
Jodie, this is a really interesting conversation. I want to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Let's get back to the conversation with Jodie Morgan, CEO of Nexus Circular, which is an advanced plastics recycler based in Atlanta. So, Jodie, I know that you're early in the process of launching all these material flows, but what are companies making with your recycled materials? Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. So when a company buys our product, they put it back into the front end of their plastic manufacturing process. So the products that they make are the equivalent of virgin plastic. So if you think about polypropylene or polyethylene, it is exactly the same, whether it comes from our product or NAFTA, except that we think that there's the added benefit that ours comes from the recycled source. But when a company is buying those products and using them, say, to make packaging, for them, it's exactly the same. They see absolutely no difference if that product came from post-use plastic or came from a fossil fuel. The companies that we sell to today is Shell and CP Chem, Chevron Phillips, and they use our products then to make resins, plastic, that is made from this recycled content. They sell that to their customers, and then their customers then are able to demonstrate that there's post-use plastic used in their formulations.
We talked a little about collection a moment ago, but collection and transportation of these materials is going to be critical. And your process can handle plastics that are contaminated with other stuff, some food waste and so forth. But are you seeing an improvement in sorting so you can get the paper and the metal and other things out of the stream before it goes into your process? Is that progress happening?
There is some progress happening. I think there's two things that are important. One, and we can talk about them separately. One is around formulating for recycling.
Yeah.
You need for something to be able to be mechanically recycled in the plastic space from a formulation standpoint is actually different than what you need for an advanced recycling process. And then the second is, as you mentioned, the sorting. So sorting technology has been developed around mechanical recycling, of course, because that's what has been available for decades.
Sure.
And so oftentimes, if you think about your bin at home, and if you read your instructions about what you're supposed to put in there, there'll be a big X over the film, and it'll say, don't put film into the process. The reason for that is if you've ever been to a recycling plant or a MRF, the first thing that they do is they take all of that waste and it goes onto a conveyor and they blow air onto it. And the reason that they blow the air onto it is they want to separate out the paper. The paper has value to them, and the gust of air will blow the paper up. The problem is if you stuck your film in there thinking you were doing a good thing, your film will now blow up.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now I've contaminated this valuable source of paper, recycled paper. So that's part of the reason that they say, please don't put it in here. For now, they haven't developed great separation technology and sorting technology to separate things like film from other sources, because they the solution is please just don't put it in there.
Well, that reflects one of the problems with the single stream concept. We tend to think of the circular economy as one big single process, but it's actually a bunch of nested cycles within this bigger circular thing. Do we need dedicated collection streams for these kinds of materials like film? And to an extent, we have them with drop boxes for bags, but do we need more?
We do. And so, some of it starts with an education with the consumers, right? We think we're doing good when we put it into the recycle bin. So the first thing that we've accomplished, which is great, is we've gotten people more aware. So that's fantastic. The next thing we have to do is try to figure out how do we educate them. If you put your peanut butter jar in there with lots of peanut butter left in it, no one's going to be able to use it, right? You need to rinse it. If you kept your label on your bottle, it is going to be harder to use. So we need to educate people that really want to try to do good about how they can do better. Then the next thing that we need to do is exactly what you're saying. If there are things that a recycling plant can't handle, that doesn't mean that those products can't be recycled. It
Right.
means it needs a dedicated space, a dedicated bin, a dedicated location.
Well, you talked a moment ago about formulating for recycling, but do you have conversations with packaging manufacturers about designing for recycling? For instance, easier to remove labels would be a big one for a lot of consumers. They would take a lot more steps if it wasn't necessary to soak a label off, for instance.
Yeah. So something like a label is important for either a mechanical or an advanced recycler. For an advanced recycler, if we put a label into our process, it's really okay for us. We'd prefer not to have it in there because it won't convert back into a feedstock for plastic. It'll be as if you were, burning paper in your fireplace, right? It'll end up being that black char that comes out at the bottom. So it's a waste stream from our process. We'd rather not have it in there, but the mechanical recyclers, if you have that in there, they can't use that at all. So that plastic is scrap for them. Mm-hmm. And that's one example where there's a difference in what we can use versus what they can use. When for the advanced recyclers, we really have a bigger issue with other types of contaminants. So as an example, silica, which can be used as a moisture barrier. Mm-hmm. So if I have my chips, I want to make sure that no oxygen and no moisture get into those chips. And to do that, they put together multi-layer packaging. And one of those layers will be that barrier. Right. The problem with that barrier is that it ends up in our final product. And if there's too much chloride in our final product, mm-hmm. our customers can't use it. That is a catalyst killer for them, so they can't use it. So the barrier that we put in the package to keep the product fresh then actually makes that package so it's not able to be recycled. Right. The thing is that as we're educating the people that are designing the package, there are other ways for them to create that barrier. They just didn't know that they had to. So just like with the consumers and helping to educate the consumers, and when you put it in your bin, this is where it should go. It's also important for us, now that we have more knowledge of our own space, to get out and start to work with the package designers and say, if you want to make this package recyclable, and these are the things that you have to keep in mind.
It really is a team sport.
It's a team sport. Everyone has a role.
Now, I want to talk about how particularly the plastics industry is going to change over the next few years, because let's just acknowledge it's not a loved industry for a lot of reasons. You all joined the U.S. Plastics Pact last year, which is an industry effort to try to reduce plastic pollution. How do you see the role of chemical companies changing as circular thinking takes hold in the economy? Are we going to see the entire plastics value chain transitioning to low or no pollutant practices at some point?
I hope so. Hope is not a strategy. So I do, but I do believe that there are a lot more people within these larger organizations that want to do good and understand the reasons to do good. And there's an economic advantage to them to be able to do that. And that obviously helps. But I talked to a company once about why they were a fairly large contributor to GHG.
Mhm.
And I asked them why they were making this move. And they said, we know that we're one of the largest offenders. And so we believe that if we can change our practice, we can actually be one of the most significant contributors to a change in the trend, right? So the good thing is, I believe that it's important to get some of the companies that have contributed to the problem to also be part of the solution. Because if we don't, we can't possibly get the numbers to change. 1%, 2% is not enough. So with some of these different organizations, we're members of the ACC, we're also members of the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. We really do love to see a wide net cast in the membership because we think that these voices all need to be heard.
Now, one of the issues is the emissions from the processes that have dominated plastic manufacturing for the past 100 years, 75 years. How does the Nexus process, does it emit anything? And the reason I ask is, can you put this into current locations where there are fence line communities, low income communities too often, that are right up next to these processing facilities? And can you do that without creating more pollution that will affect those people?
You can. So for Nexus, and I think it's really anybody that's in this space today, most of us have come from specialty chemical manufacturers. We've been, or oil and gas. So we understand some of the bad things that our prior employers have done in communities. I ran another company and we had a plant in coastal Georgia that was 100 years old. And, unfortunately, we were constantly working to try and prevent anything in our plant from getting into the groundwater. And it was a legacy issue. We weren't contributing to it actively anymore. But once that's there, it's there, right? So I think most of us understand the issues. And when we come into this industry, we come into it with a bias for action, positive action to prevent that from happening. The good thing about things like the Nexus process is if we compare producing our feedstock compared to naphtha, as an example, it's about a 50 to 60% reduction. And when you do an LCA in the greenhouse gases. And part of that is because the feedstock's not processed, so you don't have to pull this from the ground. The second is we only heat once and cool once. There's no post-treatment that has to go on before our customers are able to use it. And we don't use things like, we're not washing, so we don't use a catalyst.
Right.
It's
a lot of water.
A lot of water and a lot of waste streams from that. And we don't have any of that. So these processes can be designed so that they can be very close to communities. The facilities are large enough that they tend to end up being more in industrial parks, those areas that are set up for manufacturing. But it's not the same situation that I've had in some of my plants in my prior life, where the plant was there and the town grew up around the plant, and now you work every day to make sure that you're protecting the community.
Yeah, understood. Does Nexus Circular have its own GHG net zero goals, or have you set commitments?
We have not set commitments. And part of the reason for that, when you do an LCA, and any of the LCAs that have been done in this space to date, have been done on, ours has been done on a commercial plant, but it's small. And we really want to get our Gen 3 plant, which is our new design plant, which will be up in the second half of this year, up and running so that we can properly assess and do a proper LCA. I say proper. It's, again, I'm an engineer, so I have a bias for data. I think that the estimates that we've put together are are fine and they're probably going to be right, but I want the data to be able to validate that. Once we have that, then it's possible to set those goals. Internally, we have a zero waste goal, but it's everything from, we want to make sure that if people are throwing out a styrofoam cup, that it goes into the bin that says feedstock and we use it in the back, right? Those sorts of things, yes. But as far as overall, I want to get some more data so that we can make sure that the goals that we're setting, we can obtain.
This is an interesting facet of launching a sustainable company, is that everybody expects you to be able to say this right out of the gate, but you have to figure it out before you can actually set those goals. Now, you're also aiming to recycle 4 billion pounds of plastic, particularly hard to process plastics, by 2030. How are you feeling about that goal and your progress toward it?
I have no doubt that we will be at that goal. In fact, our internal goal now to become an external goal with my next sentence is actually 5 billion. And I don't have any concern about being able to do that. We have, 6 lines that we're building in our new facility. We have a new line that we're putting in here. Mm-hmm. The new line is, 4 times faster than our current line that's been operating since 2018. And then we start building 30 lines a year. So there's just no reason that we shouldn't be able to hit that goal. It is absolutely a situation where you can, do well and do good. It's a really strong business model. There's phenomenal demand, and we've got a business model that supports investment, and we've got a technology that's proven. So there's really no reason not to be successful.
Jodie, I want to thank you for spending time with us. How can folks keep up with what Nexus Circular is doing?
You can follow us on LinkedIn. We try to put announcements out as they are relevant. We also try to keep our website up to date as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us today.
No, thank you for taking the time to learn more about us.
We've been speaking with Jodie Morgan. She's the CEO of Nexus Circular, an advanced plastics recycling company, and you can learn more about Nexus Circular at nexuscircular.com. That's all one word, no space, no dash, nexuscircular.com. Okay, plastics, the miracle material of the 1960s. Just think of the advice given to young Benjamin Braddock in the movie or in the book, The Graduate. He was told one word, plastics. That material has become a plague, and consumers have lost trust in the mechanical recycling approach because of rampant overpromising about recyclability by the plastics industry. We need to use less and recycle more plastic. Nexus has a commercial solution for 4 of the major categories of plastic, as we mentioned, plastics number 2, number 4, number 5, and number 6. And our recent guest, Emmanuel Ledant of the French molecular plastic recycler Carbios, is launching a process for plastic number 1 materials, including PET bottles and thermoforms. Those are the containers that berries come in, for instance, as well as to process polyester clothing, all in one combined load, which makes the need for sorting not a problem. That's almost a full spectrum ability to recycle plastic, but we still need to use less. And Jodie's explanation about how plastic can be reformulated for recycling, in other words, simplifying the chemical structure of plastics by standardizing on recyclable options in packaging, as well as the need to redesign packaging to remove unrecyclable materials, like the chloride-based liner in a bag of potato chips that prevents moisture from getting to the chips. All of that shows how we can reduce the use of plastic. Those changes, removing that chloride layer, for example, may be minute in any one item of packaging, but they add up to large amounts of unrecyclable plastics being retired from use. As we talked about during the conversation, the circular economy is often described as one monolithic solution to our problems, but it's a complex set of circular economies in different materials, and they all have to interact in some way because we need a viable way to manage all this. Specialty processors like Nexus Circular need to source plastics from many places that currently lack collection and sorting capabilities. There's a potential tidal wave of materials collection business opportunity laying in wait of identification and investment. And each of us can help by asking the companies that we buy from to contribute to building a recovery and processing infrastructure that rewards recycling success. Folks, it's a remarkable and pivotal moment when the old mechanical recycling ways may be giving way to circular economies that result in a sustainable and prosperous lifestyle. And we're going to be continuing to cover this topic. It's going to get more interesting. I hope you'll take a minute to share our podcast or any of the more than 390 interviews we've done on sustainability in your ear with your friends, your family, everybody you know. And if you would take a moment to write a review on your favorite podcast platform, that will particularly help your neighbors find us. You are the amplifier that spreads more ideas so we can create less waste. Please tell your friends, your family, your coworkers they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the other fine purveyors of podcast goodness. Thank you. Thank you very much for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.